Ashleigh Chapman is our speaker this morning. She is the founder and the CEO of the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice, and ALTIF. She is going to speak to us about moving from awareness to action. And as one of our pillars and goals for areas of focus for this club is definitely around building awareness, education, reducing the demand. And Ashleigh is a human rights lawyer and a social entrepreneur with 20 years of experience building solutions to help end human trafficking and protect vulnerable populations. She is the founder CEO of AFRJ and ALTIS, Business for the Good, and Freedom Council, Engage Together, and Justice U, all of those things.
So it's so lovely to be with you all. So excited to see so many people on a Thursday morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world, committed to this cause, and just really looking forward to serving as a friend to you all in this journey. There's several faces I know very well on this call, and so hello to you all. I won't toggle screens and say hello to each one personally, but just really lovely to see your faces and great to meet new people too. Always excited to meet people who are dedicating their attention, their skills, their interests, their passions to this cause, this great cause before us in this world. So I think I have, hopefully, the ability, yes, to share my screen. And I will do that now, and hope if someone could just give me a thumbs up that you can see it, that would be great. Thank you. So when Michelle and Karen reached out and asked if I would share to your club, I was really excited. I get really very excited about the potential and power and influence that Rotary has on an issue of this scale. So, and I think that we've got, we came through January, right? So January here in the US was National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Last July was World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And so we have these huge kind of initiatives, around the globe at different times throughout the year to raise awareness. And that is obviously where the journey begins. But we really want to move from awareness about an issue to action in ways that will make impact in the lives of those around you, in ways that will make an impact in your community, and collectively ways that will make an impact in our world. It is our belief, and my personal belief, and our team's belief, that human trafficking does not have to exist in our world today. But what we know, in order for that to be true, is that a world of people have to work together to end it, and that every one of those people is uniquely positioned. So that's really what the meat of what I want to talk about today. By way of introduction to Karen, yes, all the things, all the hats I wear this day. So I have been in this fight, I feel like, since birth. When I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, I live in Wyoming now. My dad was the pastor of the homeless mission. And so I have grown up all my days around really brokenness and broken systems, especially. And it was that kind of marriage of just terrible things that are happening in our world and the reasons they are allowed to happen, right? So the systematic brokenness that we see in our communities or even on a global scale that allow this kind of exploitation to happen, that really gripped my heart and mind and soul when I was a kid. So I just dedicated my whole life to solving for it. And so it's been the only thing I have woken up every day to pursue since I was 11 years old. There's a whole other story I won't tell, but it's today. So some ways I feel like this has been my whole life, and really where my head is at and where our team's head is at is what are the solutions you build that have a hope of helping every justice advocate that succeed better, every community succeed better. And that is what we've been building towards and several solutions that we've built. So on the blue side of the screen, you see the nonprofit side of our world. So we have the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice. This is something that we birthed nearly a decade ago. And the idea was that by this time in my life and journey, I had built relationships with thousands of people who were out there in the field working to combat human trafficking, whether they were in government or nonprofits, foundations, or faith-based businesses, et cetera. And the thing that I saw is they didn't really know each other. And so we began to dream about what would it look like to build something that could support all of the amazing people who are out in the world working on this issue and really serve as a conduit. That's what the Alliance is, a conduit to relationships and resources and solutions and strategies. I'm pleased to say, and it has been a rigorous journey, that in the last 7 years, we've supported over 10,500 anti-trafficking organizations and justice advocates in the field in this way through the Alliance. And I think we've just begun that work. Also, through the Alliance, we have the Freedom Council, which is our work to really ignite global companies and business leaders to join this cause. Before this last year, I was traveling 40 to 48 weeks every single year, serve just multiple cities per week, sometimes multiple countries per week, bringing people around the table to try to work together and work this problem and really understand what's going on. The missing person at that table every time is business. So human trafficking and the efforts to combat it have been heavily on the shoulders of government and nonprofit or community efforts. And business, I believe, is the key in so many ways. But beyond not being part of the problem, ushering them into becoming part of the solution. And so the Freedom Council launched, I think, in beta around 2015 and in earnest in 2016. And we've just been running with amazing companies like Deloitte and PwC and Anthem and Chick-fil-A and Delta and so many others. And I'm pleased to say Ragus has a seat on the council through Steve and Dave McCleary. And so it's just been an exciting journey to see what's possible when business comes to the table. You can learn all about that on our website. We also have a student council, which works with high school students and college kiddos who are passionate about being justice advocates in their futures and in their present. And so we're working with them to do that. But then we began building solutions that just didn't really belong in a nonprofit skin. They belonged in a benefit corporation. A benefit corporation is a company who's missional, and the profits of that company execute on that mission. And so, but you can instead of maybe supporting it through donations, you support it through impact investments. And that's what Altus is. So Karen, that's our latest and greatest endeavor, right? So we launched Altus about 1.5 years ago, and it is powering Justice U and Engage Together. I'll dive deeper into those solutions, and they are available to you today. But think of Justice U as an online university for justice. For people who are out there in the field, or from everyone who's the concerned citizen to the healthcare provider in that urgent care clinic, trying to get you the bits of knowledge you need to make a difference in your life and in your community. And then Engage Together is exactly what that sounds like. That is our solution to help communities really come together, which makes me very excited, by the way, about Rotary, because Rotary, you're already together, right? So I just love that. And Dave, I think I saw this on the call when Dave, my first Rotary Club experience, forgive me, was a few years ago when Dave McCleary invited me to join his club in Atlanta, near Atlanta, Georgia. And I was just amazed, honestly, in relation to this issue of combating human trafficking and where Rotary sits in relation to the ability to impact that. Because when I go into communities, or when my team goes in, we're pulling people together, right? So we're trying to get the law enforcement together at the table with those foundation leaders, together with those high school principals and those pastors and everyone at the table together to really understand one problem, right, that's facing their community and how each of them can rally around it. And yet you do that every week. And that is a natural kind of thing that's happening. So the power of that is huge. And I'm hoping that some of what I'll share today will help you do that faster and better. That's our whole goal. Now, I know that you guys are a club to help end human trafficking. So, but at the same time, so I don't want to rest too long on some basics, but at the same time, I also know that this is being recorded, it will be shared, and it's possible that there are people on this call who maybe don't have these bits of information. So I am going to fly through the next few slides, but it's just important foundational knowledge. And hopefully it's just affirming what you already know, and perhaps it will introduce some new concepts. And then we're going to move from foundational knowledge to action. So what is human trafficking, right? I get this question all the time. And it was a few years ago, I asked that question in a community group like this, and a very intelligent woman raised her hand and said, is it like when there's a parade in town and the people are causing traffic problems? And she was sincere. And And I had to take a beat, control my face and think, wow, this is going to be a hard session for her. This is what this is going to be. So, but people didn't understand it. They just didn't for a long time. And our world did not wake up to this till 20 years ago. And the United States did not wake up to it on a domestic scene till about 10 years ago. So we're very young and trying to understand and combat something that's very old, right? And that never really disappeared and now has come back in greater numbers than ever before. But human trafficking at its core is the sale of human beings, men, women, and children, for labor, sexual exploitation, and organs. And we work in all of those spaces in our work. I think hopefully you know these stats, right? So over 40 million souls are enslaved around the planet. I think that is a grossly conservative number because it does not account for numbers like 110 million children in bonded labor in India. It does not account for how many individuals are human trafficking victims in the United States or South America. There are whole regions of the world that this number that is being, promoted by the Global Slavery Index, and we love them, right? But they will be the first ones to say this is a picture of what they can see presently. So I think we need to understand that that number is so much larger even than that very big number there on that screen. The other thing to understand is it's a $150 billion industry. Now, this number is coming to us from the World Economic Forum and the International Labor Organization. $150 billion, that is an annual figure in the sale of human beings. And by the way, that figure is nearly 10 years old too. The world hasn't updated that figure. So we are likely looking at a grossly conservative figure there. But if that's hard to wrap your mind around, that's more than Wells Fargo, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and several other companies combined in 2018. So that is the figure we're looking at. This 300,000 figure I'll unpack for my United States friends. And although it would be true around the globe, right? So despite thousands of existing efforts, trafficking persists and is growing. And I will come to the impact of COVID on this in just a moment, because I get asked that a ton. What is the impact of the pandemic on an issue like human trafficking? I'll come back to that. But pre-pandemic, 300,000 was the number that our FBI and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were promoting as the number that they were concerned were children missing in this country and in the hands of traffickers. Between 100,000 and 300,000, that was the figure. And then Texas in 2018 came out, their Attorney General's office, they did a deep dive study. We supported parts of this to try to figure out how many individuals in their state alone were human trafficking victims. And their number was over 300,000. It was 313,000 or something like that. And so if you extrapolate that number across just the United States, we are fast approaching, if not over 1 million victims of human trafficking just in the United States. And yet the National Human Trafficking Hotline took in only about 40,000 calls. So when you see maps like those heat maps from the Polaris project, also we love them, right? So and help them over the years, you'll see this heat map that is all across the country. And yet that represents 41,000 against potential million individuals caught in this. So we have so much further to go in identifying victims of human trafficking, of labor and sex trafficking, adults and children, men and women, and every other type of nationality. I mean, it's just there is no demographic that is safe from this. There is no community that is safe from this either. I just want to highlight this. You can go and learn more about this. But the Polaris also did a typology of modern slavery in the United States, trying to help people understand when we're talking about labor, sexual exploitation, and organ trafficking in this world. In the United States, it takes on, and in the world, it takes on many different varieties of trafficking. And these are those that have been reported in the United States. Some of those will be obvious to you, I think. And some of them, you may go, what? I didn't even know that was a thing. So I'm just going to encourage you to go to this report and learn more all about that. So why is this happening? I'm sure you've been covering this in your meetings. Bottom line, it is a highly lucrative business. And there are plenty of people. And the reason for that is that there are plenty of people who are willing to buy other human beings. So we talk a lot about the number of victims, but what about the number of buyers? So if we have up to, say, 300,000 children missing in just our country, not to mention globally, and we know that in some cases they are sold multiple times per night, not to mention adults in this country, right, who are being sexually exploited. I mean, how many people are involved in the exploitation of other individuals to add up to a business model for traffickers that equals $150 billion per year? And this is something that we have got to lean harder into. We've got to take hold of, and we've got to tackle. So I just want to highlight this. Human traffickers, people who are perpetrating this crime, include both traffickers and buyers. And a buyer can be anyone, unfortunately. So if we have kind of a picture in our head about what a victim potentially looks like or a buyer looks like, I just encourage you to continue to get educated on this, because pictures sometimes come to us from social media or movies, and they are not indicative of what's really going on. And the harm in that is that you may miss someone right in front of your face who is in need and in harm's way, because we have a picture that is not complete. Myths and misconceptions. Hopefully you all know these things, right? So I break them down into these buckets. People have kind of myths about human trafficking related to where it's happening, who it's happening to, and how it is happening. So the myth that continues to persist is that trafficking is only happening in urban cities or developing countries. And the reality is it is happening everywhere, every country in the world, and every state in the United States. The who myth is that a lot of folks think it's just foreign nationals or young girls. Now, this is not just a US concept. I have been working in multiple countries over the years, and they always make this mistake. They're legislators that I work with. They are always, when they're kind of gearing up to tackle human trafficking, whether it's Europe or whether it's Latin America or Asia, I've worked in all of those areas with legislators, and they are always targeting foreign national trafficking. And they're not thinking it's happening to their own citizens. And I don't know why. I don't know why that's kind of secondary, but we need to understand it is our own citizens in any country, as well as foreign nationals who are coming through our country, pouring into our country for assistance, whatever the reason they're migrating that way. And it is not just young girls. It certainly is young girls, but it is certainly every other type of human. And we've got to, again, just get the right picture and the full picture in our head. It can be anyone. How it happens. So the myth is that there's abductions happening and chains involved. Do abductions happen? Yes, they do. Are chains involved in trafficking situations? Yes, they are. But that is not the overwhelming experience of victims of human trafficking. So the overwhelming experience is that it's a process, often been driven even relationally by someone that they either know or someone who has presented themselves to them as wanting to meet a need. Hey, we have a job for you, or we have a housing situation for you, or we can help you provide for your family. Or they're just feeling a personal need, right? I love you. I'll build a relationship with you. I'm there for you. And this process then turns into what we call invisible chains, and a lot of confusion on the part of the victims. And that is true of labor and sex trafficking, and that's true here in the US and all around the world. It's important to understand this, because otherwise we're going to start thinking of doing things to tackle this issue that might not actually address the problem that's happening in our communities or in our countries around us. So where, who, and how, right? So if we want to talk about driving vulnerabilities, we're just really passionate about this particular message. And that is that any group that is looking to combat human trafficking, you cannot succeed at this unless you are simultaneously paying attention to the vulnerabilities that are being exploited by traffickers. And that will change. That will be different. It will look different depending on where you are in the world. What are the factors in your communities? Are you an agricultural community? Do you have lots of factories? Do you have lots of foreign nationals visiting? Maybe it's a tourist area. You need to understand what are the vulnerabilities in your area that traffickers are exploiting. The best way I know how to describe this is the thing that makes wherever you live great is likely the thing that traffickers are thinking it's pretty great for them too. So in a city like, for instance, Atlanta, where our Freedom Council is based, this is a vibrant city. It hosts tons of events. It brings people in from all over the world. Transportation is very easy to get in and out of, whether you're using airlines or our roadways. And all of those realities create key vulnerabilities that make Atlanta vulnerable to really every form of human trafficking. So you've got to think about what are the vulnerabilities that happen in our city, our community, our country, and how do we address that at the same time that we address human trafficking head on. And then I've got a list of venues here as well. The important thing to understand is that traffickers are, again, exploiting these vulnerabilities through force, fraud, and coercion, and by luring victims with promises of work, often work, shelter, food, and support. Key vulnerabilities in any country, but especially here in the United States, I do want to land on this for a second and see if you can see the common thread, are runaway and homeless youth, children and youth in or aging out of foster care, individuals fleeing violence or natural disasters, individuals with disabilities, those who've already suffered types of exploitation and abuse in their lifetime, foreign nationals, all marginalized groups and minorities. And why? Why are these the driving vulnerabilities to trafficking? The answer is because all of these groups lack support systems and safety nets. And so if I have been, so here in the United States, some of the children that are being rescued from trafficking, their average placement history in some states is 14 foster care homes. In other states, it's 10 foster care homes and 2 juvenile justice facilities. So we're talking about compounding vulnerabilities in individuals' lives that lead to the point where they can be easily exploited by traffickers. And I think that reality should anger us. And I think it should also compel us to when we're creating a strategy to combat human trafficking, to try to figure out how can we help individuals who are in these spaces. Maybe they have compounding vulnerabilities that are starting to build in their life, or maybe they're just in a vulnerable position, or they're just new to your country, they're just new to your community. And so they either have compounding vulnerabilities from these types of things, or they're in a vulnerable position. How will you meet individuals there so that you can prevent this from ever happening in the first place? I'm not going to go through all of the signs. I think that you've probably been educated on that, and I'll send you more resources. We'll talk about those later, resources for this. But here are all the key signs of human trafficking. And the main thing that I want to zone in on indicators, and hopefully you've been trained on this, is this. The indicators that will present to you vary greatly depending on who you are and what you're doing. So the indicators that will present themselves to a teacher in a school setting or virtual school setting will be very different from the ones that will present themselves to you if you own a front-facing business in your community. So learn those indicators and then really understand how are you likely to see this? And no one indicator means that trafficking is happening. But let me encourage you, don't ever hesitate to make the call. Sometimes individuals get a little bit nervous about making calls to report potential cases of human trafficking to either their local authorities or their national hotlines. Don't ever hesitate, because it could be the call that saves a life. You do not have to be the prosecutor. You do not have to have probable cause, or you don't have to have the whole story. But if you see something that seems odd, that seems suspicious, I just encourage you to look longer. Take a minute and just look longer. And if it still seems off, then make the call. And so much of the time, law enforcement that we work with are just beg the citizens on the street to make those calls, because it could be the missing piece to something they already are concerned about, but they can't move on till that call, that final missing piece comes together for them. So don't feel like you got to know it all. Whatever it is you're concerned about, make that call. It can save lives. I have personally, obviously we train on this all the day long, but I have personally made that call so many times, and it has saved lives. So don't feel like you got to have it all, but just have the courage to make that call. Let's talk about the impact of COVID-19 for a moment. So early on in the pandemic, we got a lot of individuals who reached out and asked me, hey, is there a silver lining to this pandemic? Right? I mean, maybe human trafficking is decreasing around the world. And that is not what is happening. I want you to understand traffickers are entrepreneurs in the very worst sense of the word. So they are going to figure out how to make their business model work, and they have done that. And many of them, the chatter on dark web places and in other places by traffickers was they were very excited about the opportunities that this pandemic was presenting to exploit individuals, either through online exploitation or through what I'm sharing here, which is that before the pandemic, compounding vulnerabilities led to risks for human trafficking. I mean, we just talked about that. But with the pandemic, we have both new vulnerabilities starting to happen with individuals and new compounding vulnerabilities for individuals, which will greatly increase risks for human trafficking. And the vulnerabilities that are on the rise here in the US and all around the world directly due to the impact of COVID-19 is domestic violence, isolation, child abuse, poverty, social marginalization, increased unsupervised online activities by our kids and youth, unemployment, hunger, lack of healthcare, lack of access to services, housing insecurities is a key vulnerability traffickers exploit, and financial instability. So if you want to learn more about these vulnerabilities, the nexus to human trafficking and what you could do, I would really encourage you to go to Justice U and earn your micro badge on the impact of COVID-19 and human trafficking. So it's a 15-minute, micro badges are small. It's a 15-minute learning experience, but you'll end up with a greater understanding of this issue and how you can help. Here's the National Human Trafficking Hotline here in this country. In the United States, if you're global, I would just encourage you to try to figure out what hotlines exist in your nation. And then if that's an impossible thing, sometimes some countries don't have those types of hotlines, then you need to call kind of your local, maybe embassies or your local authorities, or depending on the type of trafficking might guide you to what authority base you would call. And I always say this, even if you're calling locally here in the US, ask for a person who's been trained on human trafficking, because a lot of law enforcement and agents have not received that training yet. And so if you're providing a tip to someone who has not received training, they may not hear what you're saying, and they may not understand the context of what you're sharing. So no matter what you call or who you call, always ask to talk to someone who's been trained on trafficking, and that's going to help you find the right person to understand what you're concerned about. All right, let's move on. So who you are and what you do matters. I hope I've been getting that message across, and everyone is needed. So how do you move from awareness to action? Well, you've got to understand this truth. So we are not asking all of you on this call to become law enforcement, right? And we're not asking you to quit your job and even go full time into the world of combating human trafficking. That it is not necessary to do those things in order to impact this significantly. And so we're going to walk through that now. So here's the thing. And I was just on a call with a state leadership, and they were, this is where they're at. So this is happening in our individual lives, and it happens in communities or states. So when people think, what can I do to help end human trafficking? Their heads rush. Their first impulse is to rush to these three areas of effort. They want to raise awareness to help prevent human trafficking. They want to intervene, right? We've got to get those people out of those situations. They want to rush to help with rescue or exit. And they want to support aftercare. And usually that means they want to raise $2 million and set up a shelter in their local community. This is where their head's at all the time. And so when we come into countries or even communities, they're highly concentrated, right, in these three areas. These are greatly needed efforts, but this is not the whole story. So I want to show you the whole story. And my encouragement in the next couple of slides as we walk through this, because I guess it could be overwhelming, right? Like it's going to maybe potentially be an overwhelming amount of information. Here it is. This is a world of opportunity for you. So check the impulse to be like, whoo, that is a lot of stuff that has to happen. We are not asking every one of you to do all those things that I'm about to share. What I am asking is for you to put on your thinking cap and say, how is my life perfectly fitted to do something in this space, right? So whether I'm going to wear my professional hat, my business hat, my church hat, my civic hat, right? Like whatever hat you're wearing or could wear, to combat this issue, think about those ways. And we have lots of resources to help you on that journey. So here's the big picture. This is everything that needs to be happening in order to truly succeed at combating human trafficking. And this is true whether it is in a local community or a country or frankly, the globe. So I spent years and with about 25 legal interns with me researching everyone on the planet who was working to combat this issue to try to distill what are the variables that have to be in play where the equal sign is no human trafficking here. What are these variables? And this is what you're seeing. So the highest level is prevention, identification, rescue or exit, restoration, and reforms. All 5 of those have to be in play. So if we're highly concentrating in certain areas, understand what's happening is we are leaving gaping holes in a comprehensive strategy to attack trafficking that traffickers will exploit. So, and it will also mean that victims or survivors will fall back into re-exploitation if we're not watching all of these pieces of this puzzle. But under prevention, it's not simply an issue of raising awareness. We've got to address demand. We talked about that a moment ago. So who is driving demand in our community for these individuals? And how do we address that? How do we address that culturally? And how do we make it not worth their time to think about? Right? So if I'm going to be more likely to get away with purchasing a child to sexually exploit than I am for maybe buying a drug or a weapon in my community, we've got some work to do in that community to make that not the reality. Vulnerability, we talked about that. So we have to figure out what are the driving vulnerabilities. How do we address those? That will prevent human trafficking. So these are all the things that sit in that bucket. Then if we move to identification, it's an issue of training people who are in a position to see this and interact with trafficking situations on not just the indicators they'll see, but the protocols that need to be in place, and the outreach to vulnerable populations in your community. When we move to rescue or exit, and individuals fall on all between that spectrum, of reality, it's not just an issue of intervention. It's temporary shelters need to be available. Where are we taking that adult male who's a labor trafficking victim in our community when he gets removed from the situation? Where are we taking that child? Where are we taking that mom who has kids? So if those temporary shelters aren't available, individuals will continue to be in harm's way. Services that need to be available, whether it's dental, medical, legal, and so many more, and victims advocates. So how do we walk alongside? So earlier I heard a gentleman talk about CASA. Love that. I've been a CASA. We love CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates. This is an opportunity for civilians to walk alongside individuals who are going through our justice systems. Make sure those programs exist for survivors of trafficking too. If we move to restoration, it's aftercare and reintegration. So it's not just the aftercare. Hear me on this. And this, I think, is a key opportunity for Rotary. Reintegration has to happen. If all we're doing is removing individuals that have come through, we just talked about it, compounding vulnerabilities in their lifetime, and there is no pathway to success, no pathway to education, no pathway to living wage jobs or careers, no pathway to housing on the other side of them leaving that situation, what's going to happen? They're going to go back to the very vulnerabilities that led to their exploitation, and round we go. And we've got to focus here. So what can you do in your communities to open those doors for survivors? Because government can't do that job, and nonprofits often cannot do that job. It has to be the business community or business professionals to help make that happen, or your educational institutions. Then we move to reforms, and don't glaze over here, because people sometimes are like, oh, reforms, like I want to look at everything else, but not that. Hey, if your laws, policies, or systems are fighting you, if they're not in alignment with combating human trafficking, everything else you're trying to do will not work either. So really pay attention to when you're running up against a problem and trying to execute on any of these issues. It could be the problem has to do with a policy that needs to change, has to do with a law that needs to change, or a whole system that needs to be reconfigured to properly deal with this well. Okay, everyone is needed. So I'm going to talk really fast in the next couple of minutes. Here we go. Everyone. All right, that's churches, communities, businesses, foundations, government, individuals, professional associations. All Rotarians need to join this fight. Universities and educators and everyone. And the reason we break it down this way is because we want you to think of it, because every one of these individuals is not just needed at the table, they have something unique to offer. and bringing it together. They don't, everyone here does not need to turn into a social worker, right? They need to be who they are so that all of that we just discussed can occur and can happen and can be supportive. Think about who you are and what you do in the context of moving from awareness to action. So if you're in healthcare, if you travel, if you are volunteering in your community, if you're a parent, right? If your business is open to the public, all of these are going to kind of frame how you're going to be able to make an impact in your community around that entire spectrum of need, right, in your community. And also remember that any effective strategy has to address vulnerabilities. So if you're working to support foster children in your community or orphans in your country, hey, that is huge. That is huge. It's in every way connected to this issue. And sometimes that's important. When you're rallying other people to join you, maybe they're seeing human trafficking completely separate from maybe they're passionate about education. Well, great, because we need education to come to the table to help combat human trafficking. Or maybe they're passionate about feeding programs and food programs. Great, because that's a key vulnerability that is driving human trafficking. So help people around you to understand the nexus between these issues and pull them in to strengthen what's missing. When you're navigating a world of need and navigating a world of opportunity, again, it's just really important to settle into the fact that you are uniquely positioned. And when we're thinking about how to act, you've got three options. So you can enhance what you're already doing. So let's talk about that feeding program or the education program. Maybe a business you work for is passionate about education. Great. Then have them provide educational tools to local shelters and aftercare programs that are working with survivors so that they can help those survivors attain their educational goals. You don't have to become something radically different, right? You're just extending, you're just enhancing what you're already doing. Come alongside those who are already doing it. So sometimes we get so fired up and so passionate about this issue that we blaze out there and start to try something new. And I would just say, stop that impulse. The first impulse should be, who all's working in our community now? And how can we support what they're doing? So let's come alongside them and figure out how to help them. And when we've done that, we'll start to discern, are there gaps in our community? And if there are, then you can fill them. All right, last 30 seconds, here we go. Resources for you. So I know that that's a lot of information, and it's a journey to walk through that. So we have resources available for you. I mean, tons. We are giving you everything we have the world over in this Learn How to End Human Trafficking series. So if you go to Learn with Justice you can take this series. It will take you about 5 hours, but you can take it in bits, like 15-minute chunks. You can take it on your phone or your laptop, your favorite device, and you'll walk through not just the world of trafficking, but the strategy to end it and a choose your own adventure path at the end to create your own strategic action plan with all of those bits of knowledge that you've gained. So I love this series. So please go check that out. If you're in healthcare, we just launched hot off the press with Dr. Jordan Greenbaum, a globally renowned doctor and just amazing human, our healthcare response to human trafficking series. This also is a journey for healthcare providers, but they can also just take it off the shelf too. So if they've already had awareness training, but they don't know what the health impact is, they can go there. If they need to set up a protocol, they can take that course. If they don't know how to build partnerships, they can take that course. So go there and check out that if you're in healthcare. Engage Together is a universe of resources for you. So if you're like, well, where would I go to figure out who's doing this thing or this idea or that organization? Go here. We have toolkits, online libraries, all of it. We've taken the Google out of it. So go to Engage Together and grab all of those things. And I have additional resources for you on this page, which you can go to later. Whew, and that is all. Okay. Karen,
Wow,
I hope that...
Ashleigh.
There we go.
Thank you, Ashleigh. It's fun for me. It's humbling and rewarding for me to hear that your message is the same as what you started teaching me 4 years ago, and so that consistent perspective and building and watching the growth and the development of your organizations, as well as is fabulous. But it's also for the rest of you, being encouraged that this message is the same that I heard Ashleigh talk about 4 years ago. And so that consistency, the problem is the same. The issues are the same with the exception of COVID. We didn't have that conversation 4 years ago, but there were other problems. So thank you. I think one of the things that's most encouraging for me, Ashleigh, and I think rewarding, should be rewarding for you, is that if you look at the purposes and the focus for our club in truly ending human trafficking, they are totally aligned with what you're talking about, and looking at, the education awareness, but then educating youth, and then as one of the major vulnerable populations, and then looking at, as we looking at prevention, both from the supply side and the demand side, and reducing the vulnerabilities and putting those support systems around and supporting those organizations that put those support systems around those vulnerable youth, those vulnerable populations and individuals, and also on the demand side. And so, it's encouraging to see that. I think we're right in line with the things that you've talked to us. It is an overwhelming issue, but we've got 1.2 million Rotary members around the world. And as you said, we as a Rotary organization and as individuals are uniquely positioned to be able to do something about this. And it's exciting to be a Rotarian at this point.